I just noticed this. So I was talking about the LGB Alliance earlier, right? And saying how, they purport not to be trans. Obviously, this is a biased website, but let's just see what it says. The anti-trans charity LGB Alliance has taken out a full-page advert in Scottish newspaper The Herald ahead of tomorrow's election. There's elections going around all over the place tomorrow. Urging people not to vote for candidates who believe trans women are women. What is a lesbian? Is the headline of the advert, which also carried the group's logo and a cartoon of a ballot paper going into a box labelled vote. It may seem obvious, the advert continues. Surely everyone knows the answer. It goes on to make several dubious claims, including that trans women who are yet to undergo gender reassignment are not women, despite the Equality Act, what we were talking about earlier, protecting trans people who intend to undergo gender reassignment. That women are being removed from dating apps because they state that they are only attracted to biological women, and that lesbians are being accused of transphobic for not wanting to date trans women. So, do they actually, can we zoom in on this? Do they actually show, here we go. Let's actually read this. So, we've gone through that. Okay, so it was just the first bit they said there. So, it may seem obvious, surely everyone knows the answer. Yet many candidates in this election claim that the answer is anyone who says they are. So that actually, funnily enough, is, how I think I got sidetracked as like shock horror, me getting sidetracked. That is exactly what I would say now. So how I couldn't say earlier, like when I said earlier that I don't know. Oh, thank you for following Twitchmaster94. Thank you very much. Welcome. And feel free to ask any questions. Like I am very open to any questions. I apologise for my long diversions onto other bits and pieces, but yeah, if there's anything I was talking about that you're particularly interested in, I didn't cover, like please just message me, or if you feel more comfortable via email, reach out to me. I'm going to update my channel with my email address, and like feel free to contact. So what have they said? So I was talking about anyone who says they are. So remember earlier, I think it's because I went down the explaining what other people's answer to that often is. So again, other people's definition tends to, or everyone's definition, tends to exclude a group of women. However you start defining what a woman is, I've not come across a way where you don't end up excluding a group of women. Because no one woman has had the same experience as another woman. Some grow up wealthy, as I said earlier about sports, some don't. Some have a fantastic education, some don't. People live in different countries, which I'd argue, is probably, well, it depends on what countries, to be fair. I imagine in Europe probably have a fairly similar upbringing and probably not too dissimilar. I'm not going to make too many claims about that because I'm not that knowledgeable, but my point is that you end up excluding people. And so if that's the case, that doesn't work as your definition because they're cis women, so they're people that you agree are women. So what is your definition? Which is the question they asked you. And this where it comes back to, well, actually, it's your identity. It's anyone who identifies as one. That literally is what a woman is. A woman isn't defined by their clothes. They aren't defined by what their interests are. That there is no definition. It's such a bit of a vague, like there is no clear term. And this is part of the problem. There is no clear term. And this is why, at first, because I watch Vosh, at first he mentioned gender abolition. And when he first said that, I was like, whoa, what? Like, how could you do that? Like, wouldn't that be, isn't that then a problem for trans people? Because, they're saying that their gender identity is different. But I think what he's saying is, one, to be fair, in in terms of how your gender identity is formed, there needs to be way more research on that, whether there is a biological component. And I don't know. I'd have to defer to an expert on that. It's a very interesting question, but I think Vosh was quite interesting because he sort of pointed out, just imagine a world where there was no gender, there were no boxes for people to go in. People literally just be who they are, and there isn't that label. There doesn't need to be that label. So trans people would still be themselves, but they wouldn't be trans anymore because they don't need that label, because gender isn't a thing. People are just themselves. And isn't that at the end of the day what we want to go for? Don't we want a world where people are just respected for who they are? They're not put in boxes. There's not certain expectations put on them. There's not rules that they feel like they have to abide to fit into society. I'll admit, it's still something I'm sort of trying to wrap my head around. But I can sort of see why that is a good goal. And yeah, I'm sort of interested to learn more about that, to be honest. So if anyone has any views on it, please let me know. Anyway, but obviously, when you read it in the newspaper or you say it to someone, like as with me, like the first time, you're like, what? That's crazy. Anyone can be a woman? No, not anyone can be a woman. You can't just say you are. But it does sound a bit odd when you just hear it like that. And unfortunately, that's where it's weaponized. And that's what they're doing here, to make people sound, quote, not normal. There's something wrong with them, which unfortunately has been the historical narrative for trans people. And that's why it was such a victory to have gender dysphoria. And again, not all trans people need to have gender dysphoria to be trans, but the people who do, it felt such a victory because it no longer could be, oh, you've got an illness. Because it's not. It's your identity. Anyway, sidetracked again. It doesn't matter if a person was born male. It doesn't matter if a person was born male, takes no hormones and has no surgery. Someone who identifies as a woman and as a lesbian must be accepted as one. We as lesbians are also told we must use the person's preferred pronouns and be fine admitting the person into women's single-sex spaces. So already you can see this is, again, only thinking about trans women. The focus is so often on trans women. Lesbians, gays, and bisexuals have fought long and hard for equality as people who are same-sex attracted. But if, as many politicians now argue, gender, the way you feel, is more... the way you feel... the way you feel, like, to me, it sort of is, but it can, written in this context, it can just make it sound very sort of arbitrary, like, I just feel like that. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm putting that across very well, but it's someone's identity. It's who they are. It's core to their being. Like, trying to fight against it. For me, I've done it. I tried it. When I used to have, I'm gutted. I used to have long hair down to the bottom of my back, and I used to paint my nails black in sixth form, which is sort of 17, 18 years old. And that was me trying to make myself feel a little bit better and try and subdue some of the gender dysphoric feelings that in ways I thought I could get away with. And it's to suggest, like, I don't know, it's maybe I'm overreading into it, to be fair, but it just feels, saying just, the way someone feels, or how you feel, it's deeper than that. It's who you are. And I tried burying it after university. I cut my hair like really, really short, which I hate. I did that. And I decided I'm going to try and fit in. I'm going to try and make it pretending to be a man. I'm going to do it. And I convinced myself I was going to be able to, and that meant that I wouldn't, quote, ruin my life, and that I'd be able to have a family and children, and that's what I do. But it didn't last, because that's not who I am, and I struggled every day. And yeah, I just feel like it, obviously there's an element, of course it's partly how you feel, but just written in this context is very important, and it just makes it feel so it makes it seem so unimportant. Hopefully that sort of makes sense what I'm saying. Also, this bit here on the previous paragraph, like, when they're very obsessed with trans people who take no hormones and no surgery, again, it's your identity. So why does it matter, how someone looks or what sexual parts they have? Why is that relevant to you? That's none of your business. And as a lesbian, must be accepted as one. So I am a lesbian, but sexual orientation is different to gender identity. So, so just very quickly on that, I do not know if there is any sort of correlation or any link between the two, but they are not the same thing from all of the research that I've. So I would, again, I mentioned him earlier, Jamie Dodger, does YouTube videos, and he actually, I think, I haven't been watching some of his videos recently, but he's doing a PhD, I believe, in, I'm gonna get the title wrong, and he's never going to see me, so he's never going to hate me for getting it wrong, but it's around trans people and gender identity, I believe. It's something like that. That's terrible, I should remember. But he's someone who's actually in that space and doing the science on it. So please go watch him or other people. There's lots of other people out there, and there needs to be more research. But people do conflate the two a lot, which is frustrating because they're not the same. I guess maybe you could argue perhaps that's the problem of the LGBT acronym, in that people see LGB as, and they assume T is the same in terms of it's a sexual orientation. That's a whole other discussion, but I think unity is our greatest strength. Divide and conquer often is tactics that people use to turn people against each other, so no one's then fighting for their rights as a whole. And I think it's so much better, every minority bands together and doesn't give an inch. Again, Vosh has talked about this, that you don't give an inch on anything, and I completely agree with him. You don't let up on Black Lives Matter and racism in terms of institutional racism, systematic racism, and you fight for rights and improvements in the systems for that. It's the same with trans rights. You fight for everything for that. You fight for the right for LGBT people to be taught about in schools. You fight for the right for trans children to play on the respective teams that are right for their gender. You fight for their right to healthcare, because if you don't, then those things will go, and then it will be going for the rights of gay people, equal gay marriage. And it sounds a bit scaremongering, but unfortunately, there's still, like in the US, I can't. To be fair, I don't know what the stats are in the UK, so I couldn't say. But I know in the US, religion has a much heavier influence in the US than the UK in terms of politics. And that it's still on some Republicans people. I have to try and find. I don't like just spouting rubbish. I'm not going to say it because I can't actually remember who it is. But there is some evidence that you can find that there are people who are still very much against gay marriage, and unfortunately, these things will be the next thing to be attacked. So the whole community needs to stand together. Anyway, again, massive diversion. So you're not getting very far. So yeah, here we go. As lesbians are also told must use the person's preferred pronouns. Okay, so two problems here. One, no one's singling out lesbians to call people by their preferred pronouns. I've not ever seen that, ever. And two, preferred pronouns, right? So that's just basic respect. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. It is just basic respect. You may not agree with it. No one is forcing you to suddenly declare that, yes, I fully embrace you, I fully accept your identity. No, I mean, hey, it'd be awesome if people did that, but no one is forcing that. What people are asking is that you just give them basic respect, to respect their identity, and don't make them feel uncomfortable. That's all it is. It's not asking that you suddenly have to change your beliefs. That's it. And again, the whole is it the C16 bill in Canada a few years ago about Jordan Peterson talked about it, and I think I'm not necessarily a fan of Jordan Peterson, but I think perhaps he was unfairly criticised and labelled as transphobic. But what I would say is he sort of built up a bit of a shitstorm around that. So if you don't know, it was related to, he built it up as basically it's compelled speech and you could go to prison for using the incorrect pronoun, or you could get a fine for using the incorrect pronoun. Now, that's, as far as I've read, that's not the case. And whilst I understand the point he's trying to make, I don't think it's being transphobic, personally, but I think what he was trying to make was that compelled speech is a potentially dangerous thing, and you want to be careful about forcing people to say certain things. However, there are some circumstances where I think you need to protect people. I'll go on to that in a minute. But in this case, so the actual law didn't say that you had to use people's correct pronouns. What it was is attached, I believe, to like its reference information or something. There were guidelines to that law, or to a law, or to something that law referenced. And in the guidelines, it says that you should use the preferred pronouns. And so people then took that as, if you don't, you'll get the repercussions of the C16 bill, and you'll potentially go to jail, or you'll get fined. Now, in reality, no one's going to flip and send you to jail because, like, say I met you in the street and then you accidentally, say I unfortunately, you identified me as a man, like, just, maybe just because the way I've got my hair that day or whatever, what I'm wearing, and, that's not great for me, but say you did, then, and you then said, oh, excuse me, mister, or miss, yeah, or, okay, that's not really a pronoun, that's rubbish example, bad, but, or just said, oh, him over there, or said, oh, he's the one you want, or something, or just referring something, but you've just, all you've done, you haven't really interacted with me, you've just, oh, he's over there, like, say you're, yeah, that's a good one, a waiter in a restaurant. I've come in and sat and just talked to someone else, but the waiter may have just noticed it and gone and heard the name, could have just had the name, and identified me as male. The rest of my party come in, I mean, we're talking about non-COVID times here, but the rest of my party come in and talk to this waiter, and he could just go, oh, he's over there, or she, over there. And that's not being transphobic. That's someone just making a mistake. They've incorrectly assumed your gender, and there's no, for the most part, just using this example, there's no malicious intent there. So you're not going to go to prison. You're not going to get fined for that. Like that's just not a thing. And, then when, say, he walked up to the table and then, he referred to you in some way that was obvious that he saw me as a male, as a man, then I would then say, and if he then referred to me as miss after that, that's fine. But if the waiter then continued, and I'm not talking about slip-ups, because it is quite clear when people slip up. You can tell by body language and how they react. But not always, but most of the time. But if he continued to do it out of spite, well, that becomes harassment or abuse like anything else. And that's what you're trying to protect people against. But it's not saying that you're going to be, fined or go to prison for just using the incorrect pronoun once or twice. Like, I came at work at the start of last year. And obviously, well, not obviously, but as I said earlier, I kept it very secret. No one else knew. I didn't tell anyone. The first person that I told was my counsellor and then my GP. So no one at work knew. And when I then had to tell HR first, and I'll go over that another time. But when I then sort of came back, most people actually were really good and sort of managed to make that transition. But some people did refer to me with the wrong pronoun now and then. And some people still do, well, a couple of people still do. But it makes me feel uncomfortable, granted. But then I never get the sense of doing it maliciously. And I would never go, oh, they should be fined for that. Or, oh, no, that's just harassment. It's not. And this is why I say context. It's the intent, and context is so important. And I've had this discussion because people have been really worried about it. And it's like, no. It's like, in the same way as names. Like, you don't know someone. You talk to them, you find out their name, and then you use their name. Or they might have a nickname and you go, oh, is that all right? You form a social contract with them that it's okay to refer to them in a certain way. It's no different with pronouns. You have that conversation, and yet people argue, oh, but it's too complicated to remember. It's really not. Like, you can remember people's, okay, I'm not the best at remembering names, but you just politely ask. And and that's where, like, just getting back to this very briefly with Jordan Peterson, that's why I feel like he massively blew it up. Like, it wasn't a big issue, and you could turn it around and say, well, it's not compelled speech. Oh, that's interesting. Good old me setting up a website. He could have, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so Jordan Peterson with that, he's arguing it's compelled speech because you're being told what you have to say. But you could just flip it and say you're just being, told what to avoid saying by not using people's unpreferred pronouns. Like, you can flip anything, and you can liken it to racist language. So whilst I get it, I think he just massively blew that up and caused a massive media shitstorm for trans people. And ended up getting himself labelled as transphobic, which I don't think he is, because when he's been asked, and when from what I've seen, he's always referred in person to trans people with their preferred pronouns. He hasn't purposely then misgendered them, because that would be being an arse. So anyway, massive diversion. Why am I getting loads of these? Let me just shut this down. Apologies. Yeah, so where are we? So yeah, that was all of that. I do go on some rambles sometimes, don't I? I apologise. And then the final things for admitting the person into women's single-sex spaces. So that has been happening for years and years. So unless you can provide some evidence as to why that is actually a danger, then what is your problem? You've probably been in the toilet at some point with a trans person, be male or female. So yeah, that's that. Again, it's just trying to scaremonger. Lesbians, gays, yeah, no, I haven't read this. I read it out here, didn't I? So let's just start here. Lesbians, gays, and bisexuals have fought long and hard for equality as people who are same-sex attracted. But if, as many politicians now argue, gender, the way you feel, oh yeah, no, I did talk about this, is more important than our biological sex. Again, what do they mean by biological? Because that's always the term they use, biological. Often it means chromosomes or your private parts. Our rights are completely undermined. Okay, so no one's arguing that gender is more important than sex, as far as I've heard. I mean, if anything, I've heard the opposite, right? With potential gender abolition. You know what I mean? No one's arguing for the abolition of sex, as far as I know. But okay. But they're separate things anyway. One is sexual orientation. One is gender identity. That they're not in competition. It's framing it in a way. Again, this is what I mean by division, right? They are supposed to be. And do you know the worst thing that really upsets me? They have just been granted charity status. I think it was last week. They're granted charity status in the UK. I just don't get it. And yet they are putting stuff out. Oh, this is what. There you go. Hey, Charity Commission, we have an election tomorrow in Scotland. The LGB Alliance have published a political advert in Scottish press. From your own guidance, a charity cannot exist for a political purpose. In addition, this advert demeans and denigrates the rights of others. Shush. Sorry, email. So, yeah, it's infuriating that they're being granted charity status because this is very obvious. They are trying to split the LGB and T. That's literally why they are called this. They were formed around the consultation period starting for the Gender Recognition Act, and that is their purpose. Most of their stuff is about trans people. So, yes, for example, lesbians who say we would never date people who identify as women but retain their male anatomy are increasingly accused of being transphobic. Okay, so this is a interesting discussion actually. So I would say that if you just say outright you wouldn't date anyone who's trans, I would say perhaps you should think about why that is. Perhaps just think like why do you feel that way? What's the reasons for it? And the reason I say that is because you could have someone, let's just say you could be a trans man and you're a cis woman and you are attracted to them. And, you know, enough to actually potentially want to, you know, maybe have a nice night out and go back to your house, etc. and the follow on Netflix. But are you saying then that solely because the fact they're trans, that then that rules that out? Because then really that's sort of meaningless there. Like, you're attracted to them. So why does them being trans matter? Now, what you might say is then, oh, well, the genitals. So if that trans man has a vagina, then maybe as a cis woman, maybe you're not into that. Maybe that's not your thing. But that's fair enough. That in my view, that doesn't make you transphobic. It doesn't make you transphobic not to be sexually interested in a vagina or a penis. That's fair enough. People have sexual preferences and what they like. I mean, kinks are perhaps the very obvious example of that with BDSM, and there's lots of ways that manifests. But I don't think you can call someone transphobic for that. But if you say that man, the trans man, had a penis and you were attracted and you got on well, then, well, what is the reason that you said you wouldn't date any trans person? Like, you are attracted to that person, you like their personality, so is it boiling down purely because they're trans? Well, perhaps maybe that's slightly bigoted. Like, there's no actual reason there, is there? But I'm not saying that if they have sexual parts that you're not into, that you're transphobic because then you're not interested. Not at all. No, like that's fair enough. That's understandable. But equally, and this is the very depressing and sad trans panic defense I think mostly in the US, where mainly it's been trans women have gone home with a man, and then they've not realised apparently that they're trans, and so when they find out back at their place, wherever that may be, they lose it and potentially injure or kill that trans woman. And I believe that's referred to as a trans panic defense. Google it, please, because I'm sure there's better information on it. And I don't know if that's been removed, but that is not an excuse. Like that's, I mean, the way of dealing with that situation is, I'm really sorry. Actually, I'm just not into that. Like, I'm really sorry. That's the way to do it. And to be perfectly honest, there's a discussion that came up when I was watching Vosh, actually, because I think, and again, don't quote me on this, but because I haven't watched Destiny, but I think Destiny made some comments about, is it rape for if a trans woman goes down on a cis man and the man doesn't realise that it's a trans person until then they get undressed fully? Is that rape? Because that's they didn't consent to a trans person, I believe, was the argument. But please check out Destiny's channel for his actual side of it. And it's like, to me, absolutely not. Like, that is not rape, because you've both consented to that action at that time. I mean, if you're arguing, well, I didn't know that someone was trans, and so therefore I'm not. You were attracted very much at that point. You weren't tricked. No one tricked you, which is often the defense. You were attracted to that person and you willingly engaged. Obviously, any form of trickery or manipulation, that's just bad, irrelevant of who you are or what you identify as. That's just a separate thing. But if you were both happy, then that's not rape. That's just perhaps a misunderstanding. And in reality, a lot of, just personally, and from what I've heard, again, this is anecdotal, so I apologise because I should find some evidence for this. But if I just talk personally, it's still anecdotal, I know. But I'd be concerned about going home with someone that potentially could have a bad reaction to me, because you're then in a closed space, right? Especially if that's around the time of that sort of stuff happening. So I would probably raise it if you, not right off the bat, that's not what I want to do, but if it gets to a point where you quite like, I quite like this person, I really like them, like I'm attracted to them, I'm just gonna say it, because there's a part of me as well that wants to know whether that's actually going to be an issue regardless of sexual reasons, and it's for your own protection. You don't want anything to happen when then you're alone. And it's again, I'm not saying that all other people are these evil people who will just kill everyone, not at all. But unfortunately, you don't know who you're meeting when it's someone out and about. Again, not really the current situation with the pandemic, but hopefully you understand my point. But even if you didn't, even if you got back, it's not rape. You both consented. And unfortunately, it's just an unfortunate misunderstanding. There's an interesting discussion of, well, should the trans person have told the cis person, or should the cis person tell the trans person their preference, because it's their preference? And like, I just think it's just not really an actual realistic situation. And I think if you're adults, then there might be a bit of embarrassment involved, and then probably sort of politely leave, like, depending who it is. Like, I don't think that's transphobic. I would, like, if that happened to me, someone left after getting undressed, undoubtedly I'd feel upset, right? I think anyone would. and I'd feel a bit hurt because you thought they were into you and they weren't sort of purely based on what's downstairs. But I wouldn't call them transphobic for it. I could be upset by it, definitely, but I wouldn't call them transphobic. But that upset comes from the fact that I thought that could be going somewhere. I thought it could be someone you could potentially share a relationship with. It doesn't come from the fact that I've been discriminated against because I'm trans. Anyway, that's just my take on that. Where are we? So, oh yeah, that's that paragraph. So, yeah, so it was this, for example, lesbians. Yep, so we talked about that. So, believe it or not, some lesbian dating apps now even remove women who state they are solely attracted to biological women. Yeah, because you can argue that that is transphobic. You're excluding a group of people because they are solely based on the fact that they are trans. Like, for now, you're not doing it for any other reason. You could be really attracted to them. You could be compatible in sexual preferences in terms of whether you like, what downstairs equipment you like. You could get on really well with your interests, or, just conversation-wise, their personality. You could get on, but no, you're ruling out a group of people purely because they are trans. Like, yeah, it's for me, it's the same thing as people ruling out an entire group of people because they're, they are Labour supporter or they're a Conservative supporter. Like, I won't date Conservatives, or I won't date Labour people, or I won't date Lib Dems. Like, to me, that, I don't know, it's you're discriminating slightly. I mean, it's a slightly different example, but I still don't agree with that, because yes, you might have different views, but that doesn't mean you might not actually get on. And I mean, it could be that actually you're really, really, really entrenched and opposed, but I think you probably have to just think about, well, that completely precludes me from just even engaging with someone who they might only be sort of just slightly liberal or conservative. So I don't know. It's an interesting discussion, and if you've got any views on it, feel free to message me. Where are we? So we've done that. We're grateful that many trans people who want and deserve a life lived in peace and dignity wish full equality under the law, are also horrified by the impact of this extreme approach. Grateful that many trans people who want and deserve are horrified by the impact of this extreme approach? What, the spit? Or, like, I agree with them. So I don't. If you're saying you're not attracted to a penis, fair enough. But your blanket saying, like, you can maybe defend that bit. So never date someone who identifies as a woman and retains their male anatomy. Okay, you're not into penises. Okay. And I'd agree, yeah, that's not really transphobic. But other, like, that is. And yeah, don't agree with that. So I'm not quite sure who they're referring to here. Many trans people. What trans people? Anyway, the implications of this change for gay people are profound, but we are just the canaries in the coal mine. The creeping erasure of sex. So again, this is what I was talking about earlier with J.K. Rowling's tweet last year. No one is erasing sex. No one is erasing sex. As a fundamental idea, has equally dangerous implications for all of society and women in particular. So just notice how scaremongering it is. It's fear. We're under attack. And yet, trans people are the minority. We believe a lesbian is a woman. What? Okay. An adult human female. Okay, right, yeah. An adult human female who is attracted to other women. Yeah. So, minus that bit. Yeah. We also believe that single-sex spaces in prisons, women's refugees, and changing rooms are necessary. Okay, so, as I said, we believe a lesbian is a woman, who is attracted to other women. Yep, agreed. This bit, you're conflating sex with gender. So, yeah, that's incorrect. Because what you're saying there is that there is no difference then between a woman and female. There is no such thing as gender. Who is attracted? Yeah. So these bits are also believed that single-sex spaces in prisons, such in prisons, women's refugees and changing rooms are necessary. So again, this is a fear thing. So the fear is that people are going to be predatory and assault women in single-sex spaces. Now, prisons, I believe, still have the option to move you if you are deemed a threat, and that's assessed on a case-by-case basis. So, and that should be just a case irrelevant of your sex or gender. Women's refugees. So, women's refugees, they actually, I believe they came out during the consultation to say that they are perfectly, they are behind the Gender Recognition Act reforms, because their current process of, checking whether someone is suitable to be admitted into their refuge is extensive, and they don't think that someone pretending, if that, in terms of someone doing it for nefarious reasons, which is often what's quoted as Sonia earlier, would make it through any easier than before the Gender Recognition Act reforms. So they feel that their process is tight regardless, and that someone with nefarious aims is very unlikely to get in regardless. So that is contested by the very organisations themselves. So again, fear-mongering. I mean, how far do you go with that then? Like, again, I am not saying this, but does that mean then, we shouldn't be putting lesbians in a women's refuge, Jesus, words, in a women's refuge? No, you just take it on a case-by-case basis. Like, it's again, it comes down to treating people as individuals and not lumping everyone in a box. And changing rooms are necessary. So again, that's fear-mongering, because that's implying that there's a safety aspect there with, again, predatory people who are either pretending or not, but are doing it so that they can get some benefit in terms of harming women, be that just by looking at them inappropriately or physical violence. Again, no evidence for that. Zero evidence. And this comes from a charity.